sports fans. As you can see, I'm changing up things in the background. By the way, that is custom art. And I'm going to be adding more. I have a complete sticker set. So, what we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to get a little bit vulnerable. But I also think it represents something that we need to be talking about. So, and forgive the chroma key stuff going on right here. That's just me setting up, like, my green screen in the background is homemade, completely homemade. I used wood and screws and all that good stuff, and I didn't even do all of it. Thankfully, when I was in an episode of depression, a friend helped me out. And that's kind of what I'm here to talk about, is different types of depression, how it rolls out, all of that. So, we're going to be starting off Psych Talk. Give me a second to set everything up. I am doing coffee because my voice wasn't just the coffee. It was barometric pressure. Like right now I've got this huge, massive headache just radiating. It's been there all day. I actually stand up and get dizzy. Alright. About to be game time. Let me grab my handy dandy water. But now we're going to get a little bit vulnerable here. And I think it's appropriate. Especially given the anniversary that just happened. George Floyd's murder. In fact, I'm going to try to adjust this so that I'm not flipping everything and flip. Ah! Don't do it. Don't do it. Leave me alone. Leave me alone. I need an adult. See, I keep flipping and flicking that thing over that. See, I can't do that. Okay. Okay. Oh, there ain't no winning. There's no victory here. I got victory. Alright, so we about to do our thing. I'm ready, you ready? Let's be ready. Good morning and welcome to Psych Talk, where we talk about psychology and then some. I'm your host, Sean Hupel, and you'll have to forgive if my speech is just a tiny bit off. Barometric pressure over in Lebanon, Oregon, is going crazy. And I knew I wanted to record something because we just embarked on an anniversary that is significant for our country. And it's an anniversary that should have never happened. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to be vulnerable. And I'm going to make something sound dramatic that's actually very common. But, and I'll wrap up why I'm saying this in a second and how it applies to the alpha-beta complex. That's right, we're going to talk about that today, not trauma, because of the anniversary that just happened. So, to give you a little heads up, I mentioned a depression episode. I went through a long period without eating. Like just barely getting by. Lost a lot of weight too, which puts me in a great position to, start building up abs again. And even now, I still suffer from depression here and there. And it's been ever since December. And for a while, I would only eat comfort food. And that was rare. And the thing that sustained me were, these little vitamin juices and whatnot, and multivitamins. And then, like now, when I do eat, I eat things that are uncomfortable. Meaning, I'm looking at this fried rice that I got from Lottie's over at the Beehive. And I told her extra spicy because that's how I always order it. And you can't take a bite without a pepper biting you. You get bitten back. And we all go through this. In fact, it happens so often that it's become a stereotype. People not eating after a breakup. People not eating when they're depressed. And a lot of depression comes from environment. In fact, all of depression pretty much comes from environment unless it's a chemical imbalance. Now, what does this got to do with the price of tea in China? George Floyd ended up passing away just a little over a year ago. And part of racism is the alpha-beta complex. It is very indicative to beta behavior. And when you have a group of society that is disenfranchised, put down, I mean, Native Americans, Black Americans, Latin Americans, Asian Americans. I mean, pick a type of American that's not white, and you have discrimination at some point. Even the white ones. I mean, there were Irish slaves, and then they relabeled them to indentured servants and all of that. But yeah, discrimination is absolutely normal, but it absolutely falls within the alpha-beta complex. And the reason I told you the story of my eating habits and whatnot, that is what happens. Meaning, for example, I've lived in multiple low-income neighborhoods. Multiple. And we're talking, one was a Cuban Latin apartment complex, like the old school style. One of the last ones in Arizona. And then I've lived in South Side Chicago. I've lived in Hilltop, Tacoma. I've lived in a lot of places that I'm not going to go into, like Ahwatukee, Arizona, and so on and so forth. Like, I've seen what poverty does, and I've seen what disenfranchisement does to somebody's psyche. And the reason we go into depression is when we feel hopeless. I don't see too many exceptions to that. It's also a very broad stroke. But when somebody passes away, we feel hopeless. When a breakup happens, we feel hopeless. When somebody wrecks our car, we feel hopeless. And maybe it's your favorite car. A lot of things can make us feel hopeless because we can't own the situation, we can't control it. And when we can't control it and have to accept a loss, that can lead to depression. So, and depression, I mean, it's a stereotype of people not eating and not wanting to get up and not wanting to do things. But depression can happen when you are disenfranchised and viewed lesser by society. When you walk out your door and you're afraid of your child or your husband or wife, or you're just afraid yourself to turn the key into your own car. I'm honestly afraid for a few people that I care about. One in particular who will be driving in the next 2 years. That really bothers me, that he might be at risk driving. More so than any of us. Lord knows I should have. But mine was recklessness. His might be because of the color of his skin. And so, in honor of the movement that was started much similar to Sam Cooke's involvement in the civil rights movement. So check this out. Here's a story you might not know. So Sam Cooke wrote the song "A Change Gonna Come." I'll sing you a quick bitty just in case you don't remember. I was born by the river. Now, if you don't know the rest of it, then you haven't heard it. Look up Sam Cooke, A Change Gonna Come. He wrote that in a prison cell after being arrested under racial terms. And then, what was it, a night or two later, he ended up being robbed in a hotel by somebody, he was having a dalliance with. And he runs out to the front counter, and he's stark naked, like she took everything. So here he is, back right when the civil rights movement was starting to ramp up, running up to this, the lady behind the counter at this hotel was white. And so he's just pleading to her like, hey, did you see somebody? Did you see this? Did you see that? And the lady already had a gun up, apparently. At least according to all the reviews I read, or reports. She already had the gun up, and then I guess maybe she got nervous and her finger slipped or something like that, because from what I read of the lady, she was not a cruel person. She was just caught off guard. And you know what? Misfires do happen. Let's just be real here. But at the same time, his last words were, "Lady, you shot me." So misfires do happen, but she shouldn't have been aiming a gun. And his song, "A Change Gonna Come," became a huge part of the civil rights movement. So what does all this got to do with, again, the price of tea in China? What's it got to do with the alpha-beta complex? Well, it is the prerogative of betas to seek advantage. Okay? The prerogative of betas is to accumulate societal status and wealth in order to protect and proliferate progeny. Onomatopoeia. But the progeny is like children. So basically you want to have babies and you want to protect them and you want them to be better and you want them to be happy. And we're going to go into the core of the alpha-beta complex in just a second. Well, not a second, but a little bit longer than that. Let's work with me. But the reason that we seek advantage, so we have this thing called the ego. And pretty much every religion, culture, pick a continent and a time period, there's something talking about crushing your ego. Basically dominating it, because your ego is a social self-defense mechanism that was basically inspired by betas who basically created society, who basically created currency. And then a few selfish ones decided, you know what, I'm gonna leverage this bad boy. And we're gonna cover all of that from the bottom. But I just want to cover and make very clear that racism is a very beta behavior. It's effectively projected schadenfreude as well as projected implicit bias. So what I mean by that is schadenfreude is where we see somebody get diminished and we feel better about ourselves by proxy, because the ego is an on and off switch. It doesn't justify, well, maybe a little bit good. No, it's either good or bad. It makes you feel good or bad, and it's our prefrontal cortex that's sorting with our hippocampus, our memory center. And our prefrontal cortex is kind of like the encyclopedia of our brain. Like, hey, I know where to look in the memory for, or, it's a sorting mechanism. And so we engage in this racist behavior, and our brains are trying to interpret the situation differently than what it is. And we start projecting schadenfreude to make somebody else feel disadvantaged, because even though there's 7 billion people on the planet and growing, that one person, diminishing that one person, makes us feel better by proxy. That's what the ego is. The ego, if we look at it and start shaving with Occam's razor, then the ego is a social self-defense mechanism. Okay, we're surrounded by people, we're surrounded by commerce, and we're surrounded by all these different social hierarchies. But what differentiates us from other animals is the ego. And the ego is a social self-defense mechanism, meaning you look bad in public, you get the fight or flight reflex. Am I wrong or right? I mean, seriously, people get sweaty hands, their heart rate starts racing and whatnot because they got embarrassed in public. But in private, it's not that bad. It's embarrassment in public. It's called humiliation. And that's a recognition of social diminishment. See, I'm about to bring this home. Like, I wasn't talking my own life story for no reason. Because schadenfreude, projected schadenfreude does work. We basically call it bullying. So we bully somebody to make them feel diminished, and we feel schadenfreude, which is a sense of pleasure or a sense of contentment in the diminishment of another person. Yeah, we're going into this, aren't we? All right, so when it comes to the alpha-beta complex, it is very natural. So let's look at the animal hierarchy for a second, because we will tie back into how racism is a beta behavior, but let's look at the core fundamentals of what establishes a beta or an alpha. Or, in my case, I'm an omega. I am autistic, and I have an omega personality type. We're going to define all three in just a second. But where did it come from? You look at the lions and the wolves and whatnot, you got the alpha, and then you got the betas coming around like, oh my gosh, let me in, let me in. And the alphas naturally have the selection of the pack. In fact, quite often the alphas will get rid of other males just to maintain their superiority genetically. But why do we have alphas and betas? Well, it's coordination. So animals that hunt in packs, or animals that protect themselves in packs, they survive. Free range parenting. This time they're not num-nums. So, because they banded together and they warded off whatever the heck that thing was attacking them. And alphas, especially in omnivore, not omnivore, we are omnivores. In herbivore situations, the alphas are the protectors. Like, very much so. The alphas are the ones with horns. I mean, look at deer. Or look at cows. Okay, you got the bull and they got the cow. The bull has the horns. The cow is like, oh my gosh, don't eat me. And the cows have delicious milk, if you're into that kind of thing. But the alpha-beta complex is a social hierarchy. Because the alphas, in the animal kingdom, the alphas are the stronger ones. And for humanity, the alphas used to be the stronger ones, and still consistently are. But being an alpha is more about attitude nowadays than it is about physical prowess. And follow me on this, because you can train yourself to be a pseudo-alpha. The Marines do it all the time, one of the best establishments and fraternities in the world. And one of the meanest ones, too. Gotta be proud to be American, at least when you see them in action. And you have this hierarchy that basically makes the Marines work, makes any military establishment work. The hierarchy is very much adhered to, and it very much works. But let's go into why betas want to become an alpha. If you look into any animal kingdom, the betas do want to eventually become the alpha. Quite often it's the alpha son, and then you have, and keep in mind, I'm not trying to be misogynistic here, I'm just talking animal kingdom right now. And early humans were pretty misogynistic. But okay, we're talking the alpha beta complex, alright? I am not trying to tick people off, but it's going to be inevitable because I talk the truth. And quite often I shoot from the hip. So when it comes to betas, okay, where did the currency come from? Where did all of that come from? Well, alphas, you kind of got to displace them. When it comes to betas, they group up because that's what they know. They look for moral support around, they look for other types of support around, or they attack in groups because that's how you're successful. That's how humans survived. Now the alphas are the ones directing the betas, but the betas can form their own pseudo-alphas. It just, like what defined the original alpha was probably somebody stepped up. And then we have genetic traits that carry with us. For example, I do not like spiders. And I hate snakes. I won't eat one of those things. I run from them. I truly, truly despise snakes to my core. Why? Why am I afraid of them? Why do I hate them so much? Deeply, deeply, desperately hate them. I don't like snakes. But the reason that we have an innate fear of something, whereas other people do not have an innate fear, is because our ancestors survived. One of my ancestors, or multiple, survived a snake bite, or survived a spider bite. Or they just had a natural fear of them because they saw somebody else die. And so this natural fear gets built into our genetic code in what we call junk DNA, but which is more likely behavioral DNA. Because keep in mind, we're playing God, editing genomes and all of that good stuff, when we don't even know God's name. So let's just be real here. We're pretty amateur when it comes to genetics, even though, we can change them. Yeah, we can do a lot of things. That doesn't mean we should. And that doesn't mean we understand them. Double-slit experiment is the perfect example. Which is actually really easy to explain, but I don't have the credentials to back up my explanation for it. Occam's razor, baby, I shave with it. But with the alpha-beta complex, betas had to find a way to become an alpha, right? And we already have society, and betas are always seeking to create ease. The prerogative of alphas is to protect the herd. They look high level, and they look for threats first, and they look long term, especially with humans. Humans, one of the things that differentiates us from pretty much any other species out there is the way we see time, the way we perceive time. And that goes into intellectual prowess. Our brains are much more complex than pretty much anything else out there. Pretty much, almost everything out there. At least everything we know about. So you have these alphas, just high level, they don't feel the need to impress others, but betas do. Why? Because for a beta to become a pseudo-alpha, they must acquire societal status, right? They need to get other people backing them up. They need to get yes men. It happened so much, it became a stereotype called yes men. You following me so far? Good. Let's rock this. So, you've got betas that basically need to gain compatriots. Because if they were brave on their own, they would have become the original alphas. Or their ancestors would have, or so on and so forth, blah de blah. But a person can be trained to become an alpha. And the same way that I have a fear of spiders, fear of snakes. Oh, I'm about to wrap this in, aren't I? The same way that I have that fear of spiders and snakes, and the same way that we can develop neural pathways, we can pass on genetic traits to our progeny. That's why you'll see children often act like the parent that they most resemble. There is behavioral DNA. There was a thing done, well, it wasn't a study or nothing like that, but two estranged brothers. They were identical twins, and they both ended up marrying a lady with the same name, ended up in a similar or same occupation. I mean, there were so many similarities, and they behaved the same. They liked the same type of stuff. I mean, they basically became best friends after that. And both of them had one divorce and then remarried to the same name of lady or something like that. It was insane to look at. But what that reinforces is that the same way that children will often hold same perspectives and similar mannerisms to one of their parents, or both, not all of that is learned, because children have been separated from their biological parents and they've ended up acting the same, despite no reinforcers that were obvious to make them behave that way. That was their behavior, that was their DNA. Behavioral DNA can be concreted because the DNA that we pass on to children is constantly evolving. It's constantly changing and whatnot according to our body type. Some estimates say that it needs to be solidified for at least 6 months. Others say that it has to be that a behavior or a physical trait or so on and so forth needs to be solidified for at least 2 years. I'm not sure which. I haven't followed into those studies or followed up with them too thoroughly. But the end-all be-all is we do have behavioral traits that will be passed down for us. Now, the prerogative of an alpha is to look out for the herd. The prerogative of a beta is to accumulate societal status and wealth to ultimately become a pseudo-alpha. And then I'm going to include the third variable, me. I am an omega personality. And what that means is we just don't care. Historically, we are the thinkers and dreamers and creators, which does suggest an evolutionary advantage. If you're going by evolutionary theory, I'm not trying to disparage the people who have, religious beliefs and whatnot, but evolution to at least bare minimum some degree has relevance because we do adapt. We have different skin tones, so we do evolve. And with that evolution, we gain advantage over time, or our bloodline dies off. That's how it's been throughout all of history. And then species that just can't adapt quick enough, or they get taken advantage of and displaced, they end up extinct. Hell, we've got a lot of them going on. We're probably in the, I think, third or fourth mass extinction, but we're kind of causing it ourselves. And don't get me wrong, if we balance everything out environmentally and with our human habits of being selfish and all of that, if we balance it out, nature will return to normal. True story. All we got to do is stop being selfish. But, who wants to listen to practically every religion since the beginning of time? Or every guru since the beginning of time? So the alpha-beta complex causes us to seek advantage. But what happens when Well, not us. I mean, I'm an Omega, and we're good standing alone. We want to get involved with society, but I've never met an Omega personality type that wasn't trying to solve problems. Not a one. So, as far as the Omega side of things, I mean, we're just the thinkers and dreamers. We want to contribute, and as far as I can tell, I'm at least fourth generation, but then again, oh, you know what? Let's go into genetic adaptation by behavior, because this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen epigenetically. All right, check this out. I am descended of Ashkenazi Jews. What does that mean? That means I have Lynch syndrome. And Lynch syndrome means one day I'm going to fart and die in that order. Cool beans, right? Well, there's a benefit to it. Number one, we got medical procedures that can basically save my life and prevent it. But there was a theory going around. It was a few years back. And the theory was that Lynch syndrome also increased dendritic expression. So dendrite expression between the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. As mentioned, the prefrontal cortex is our kind of sorting mechanism. It's what helps us realize, or basically recognize environment. And it ties into a few other systems. Lord have mercy. Systems in the brain. I'm going to take a drink of water because barometric pressure and coffee and all of that, I'm feeling it. I've had a steady sinus headache for about 8 hours. Okay, so, and it's strong enough that it does distract me, which is why constantly talking helps. Not barometric, I'm trying to get myself back on track, but, oh, yes, that's right, Ashkenazi Jews. So, I'm descendant of Ashkenazi Jews. And the theory was that kind of like the genetic expression that cures malaria but also causes sickle cell anemia in African Americans, or just Africans. Yeah, Africans, because that was them adapting to an environmental stressor. And people lived long enough to pass on their genes. They lived until their 30s, and then they died from kidney failure. Same thing with us. With Ashkenazi Jews, we were migrants, or at least my ancestors were. Because not just Jews, but they also mixed with the Moors, and, ultimately produced me several generations later. And they were both migrants. And we all know how America treats its migrants. So, being migrants, they were pushed into what were considered beta trades. Oh my gosh, is he wrapping it in? Yes, he is. So these beta trades, were considered banking, non-physical trades. Because back then, that was a huge industrial boom. I think it was around, it was pre-World War I-ish. Like some of the ancestors, yes, some of the ancestors, no. But as far as the genetic adaptation, you had these people working in these banking trades. And as they worked on it, they developed stronger neural pathways. And that solidified because that was their career. That was the only thing they could get into. Unless they were big and burly, which, let's just be real, with some of my ancestors that I just mentioned. So, unless they were big, burly, and alpha, plus they were migrants, yeah, they were pushed into trades that were considered lesser. And if you excelled in those trades, I mean, bankers, they made some bank. Same thing with accountants. They made some serious bank. And those were my ancestors. Now, the trade-off to having the higher dendritic expression is what we now know as Lynch syndrome, which basically means my digestive system doesn't repair its cells as well as pretty much any other system in my body, which makes me more prone to the big C word. But that also doesn't happen until about 65 plus in my family. So what does that mean? That means they lived long enough to not only accumulate some kind of wealth, but they lived long enough to have babies. And so this trade-off, this epigenetic roll of the dice, ultimately resulted in Lynch syndrome, similar to how the cure for malaria also results in sickle cell anemia. At least that's the operant theory. Nobody's ever done too many tests on it. However, there have been tests on the Ashkenazi Jews and their descendants, and there is a consistent 15 points higher IQ to the standard, whether it's nationally or internationally. Nationally, I think it's a little bit higher than 15 points to the standard. So what is that? What is all this coming to, right? Well, you have one of the fastest epigenetic adaptations, if this theory is correct about Lynch syndrome and Ashkenazi Jews. If that's correct, then you have one of the fastest epigenetic adaptations, and probably the only one I've heard of involving economics, so societal status. And that, if true, that would further edify the alpha-beta complex. So with the alpha-beta complex, I don't know if you ever played Monopoly. Like at first, you get like this one thing and somebody circles around and accidentally lands on it like, dude, give me money. But then after a while, everybody's buying up everything. There's no more room on the board. That's what's happening right now. That's what's been happening for a while. Is, you had these kings and all of that. You had these czars, and you have this governance that we're creating. And a lot of it was due to betas that were just really, really, really successful. Because betas, they can accumulate societal status and wealth. Wealth translates into societal status. So don't get those two confused or whatnot. They very much go hand in hand. So betas can accumulate wealth, and their prerogative is themselves and their progeny. That means when it comes to the whole humanity thing and whatnot, that's second nature to whatever their individual nature is, and that evolves from their environment and their own personality archetype, which is a roll of dice, I'd say at least half the time. But then again, I'm not a geneticist. I can only go by the reports. I'm gonna take a sip of coffee. So we've got this alpha-beta complex, but we also have the board filling up. You've got the Monopoly board, and people have already gotten to these things, and some can't even buy a slot on the board. We've got 7 billion plus people on the planet. And our cities are only so big, and it's the prerogative of betas to accumulate societal status and wealth. So what do you think betas are doing? They're accumulating wealth, but they're also protecting themselves by altering politics. Remember that whole society thing and whatnot? Politics wasn't established by alphas. Alphas were against it. We're talking kings, czars, and so on and so forth. The first kings and the first czars were conquerors. They were alphas. Very much so. Or they were like Hitler and just a really influential beta. Which is kind of where the problem can come in. Is betas, they will engage in projected schadenfreude. They will engage in bullying. They will engage in harassing and demeaning behaviors. Because if they humiliate somebody else, they are perceptively better than that other person. I know I'm going a little bit fast on this one. Keep up with me, because I know some people aren't. And if you are, kudos. All right, so as far as the alpha-beta complex goes and the drive to minimize threats, yeah, that's built into us. We do it all the time. Today and in the past, okay, we're always looking to fix and prevent threats. We don't want to be threatened, because the prerogative is to protect progeny, to create and protect progeny, as well as oneself. And threats, they kind of don't really work with that. So what do betas do? They use their influence through societal status, or they use their influence through wealth to buy protection. You following me so far? Because you can go into any period in history and you can probably see that, unless you can go back to the beginning of history and the beginning of society. But the beginning of society was also the beginning of history, or written history. You following me so far? Like, it's not really the chicken and the egg scenario, but it's definitely one of those where tracing the pathology isn't terribly difficult. It's really not. We just have to accept it, and accept the fact that at least 95% of the world are betas. At least. Which means 95% of you listening are betas. Now here's a little test for you. If you just felt offended by that, you're probably a beta. And don't feel bad about it. We have a negative connotation to betas the same way that we have a negative connotation to, or some people have negative connotation to black folks, or Latin folks, or Asian folks. So if you just felt offended, you're probably a beta, because alphas wouldn't feel offended. And when it comes to omegas, lions don't concern themselves with the opinions of sheep. See, I just used the word sheep to reinforce, if you felt offended when I said lions don't concern themselves with the opinions of sheep, that's a pretty good indication that you are a beta. Now, part of the issue with this is we have a negative connotation on betas. We really do. I mean, it's discrimination, only it's discrimination by omission. So follow me on this. Betas are seen as negative because betas usually have negative consequences when they take leadership roles. We saw that with the last president, who is very, very, very clearly a narcissistic beta. Very clearly. We saw all the evidence on clear display. And if you're choosing not to acknowledge the evidence that you saw on clear display, then you are a beta who was indoctrinated. You following me on this? So indoctrination is a very real thing. In fact, it's what creates a doctor. Indoctrination is a system of belief, okay? If you are Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, so on and so forth, Taoist, you are indoctrinated into a system for as long as you choose to be. Now that system might be right, that system might be wrong. Same thing if you're going to be a doctor. A doctor, the word doctor actually comes from indoctrination, which is a system of belief and practice. That's it. Like there's nothing extra to it. It's a system of belief, or the system of and adherence to belief and practices. Now you could believe that, well, you can believe anything you want to, but when it comes to like medical professions, those are refined practices. And that's kind of why we had, well, I'm not going to go into the whole religion side of things. If I start talking theology, I'll be going on for hours and hours. But the long story short is the alpha-beta complex is real. But to throw a caveat out there, betas were what created society. We wouldn't have anything close to what we have if it weren't for betas. Betas created one of the greatest systems in all of human history, capitalism. Seriously. When you want to look at when capitalism was fresh in America, and the American dream of capitalism, right? We have seen some outstanding innovations. Capitalism breeds competition, breeds innovation. It is one of the greatest systems that betas have ever produced. Right alongside currency. What do? We turn goods and services into intangible objects. Right now, America works off a fiat system, right? Imaginary money. And who thought it up? I guarantee it wasn't an alpha, and I promise you it was not an omega. We would have seen that as abhorrent, and we would have seen every single flaw in that. So, I mean, betas do have a place. And they have had a huge, huge, massive impact on society. So, why am I bringing up this whole alpha-beta complex if everything's so great and hunky-dory? Well, the problem is, the board is filled. Betas don't have anywhere to go, and so that's why everybody wants to be famous, or I want to be a millionaire so freaking bad. Seriously. Tell me I'm wrong here. Tell me I am wrong with any of this logic. So, why do we want to... What happens when the board is filled up? Let's explore that a little bit. I'm going to take a quick break because this coffee's catching me. So I'm going to pause this video recording too. But you guys are getting the inside look. And you also get to see how I interact and everything like that. I mean, this is just me. And this is the knowledge I know and the thoughts that I've had on this and whatnot. Straight up. I'm being straight up. True story. Alright, I'm about to jump back into this bad boy. I just gotta catch up to where my place was. Keep in mind, you're seeing this right off the top. Excuse me, dog hair. Yeah, we have dog hair everywhere. But you're seeing this right off the dome. everything right off the dome. If I can't spit it off the dome in a way that most people can understand, then I'm not an expert. But then again, I have to clarify because of fucking betas. Excuse my language. I didn't mean to cuss like that. I'm not gonna bleep it out, but I'm trying to keep it clean. You know what I mean? But the whole system of privilege, I'm gonna go into that because the system of privilege and how betas basically buy their dumb kids into college, and the make it or break it generation, third generation is make it or break it for any sort of multi-generational wealth, because first generation made it, second generation saw them make it, third generation just inherited it, and that's why it's the make it or break it. Like, are you going to be smart about it or not? Yeah, you're getting everything wrong right now. This is straight off the dome, and my head hurts so much. My head really, really, really hurts. Oh, and here's another insider take. When I say the stuff I'm eating is full of peppers and all that, look at this. The black stuff is either basil that's been burnt, or it is peppers. I can handle hot food. This is a little hot. But then again, depression is a real dang thing. And we're going to talk about that in the alpha beta complex too. Bam, about that money. Two girls at hallelujah. This is how I get myself pumped. Ish. So the board's full. There's 7 billion people on the frigging planet. So how are betas supposed to escalate their status? Again, being a billionaire and all of that, that's why money is so important and intrinsically important to us, and why it's important to at least 90% of the population. I say 95% because that might be a little bit exaggerated, but it also made a few people offended, which proved my point. Betas took over the world. Don't feel bad about being a beta, because you can also learn to become a pseudo-alpha. And omegas, I mean, we can adopt both sides of it. We can, through depression or through challenges and whatnot, we can fall into beta status. But at the same time, any other time, we can walk with alphas. I have, many times. And betas have too. I mean, seriously. When it comes to the military or any sort of armed forces or even just indoctrination, okay, think about this. If 90% at least of the world are betas, actually it's probably closer to 95%. What are doctors, psychologists, surgeons? There's plenty of betas in super crazy professions. And quite a few that have good hearts and really, really knock it out the park. Okay, being a beta is just a definition. It's a, I guess you could say, core behaviorism. Like core behaviorism, I don't want to say core behavior. It's intrinsic. But we all have alphas and betas in our past. Every one of us. And, you know, genetics just kind of selected things as things went on. But when the board is full, you have to feel superior to somebody, right? Like, if the prerogative of a beta is to accumulate societal status and wealth, what happens when you can't? Because we've got a lot of people living in poverty. We've got a lot of betas and alphas and omegas living in food deserts. I've met some of them. We have these beautiful minds and beautiful people with wonderful capabilities just kind of disenfranchised because where they were born or the color of their skin. So let's do the color of the skin thing. Why? Because let's get uncomfortable for a second. But I'm one of those people that I don't believe in hiding history. In fact, anybody that wants to ignore parts of history because they're inconvenient, shame on you. History is how we learn. We learn from our ancestors. Correct me if I'm wrong, because none of you can. When it comes to an older person telling a younger person, hey, this is something you shouldn't do. I've done this, it was bad, and it hurt me. Generation after generation, the younger ones think they're smart enough or that they can overcome it, and the older generation is like, haha. Generation over generation. So, we're inclined as a species to feel entitled because that's what betas want to feel. Feeling entitled means feeling secure. But sometimes you gotta walk over people, right? If you agreed with that, you're definitely a beta. No doubt whatsoever. Because that's what betas do, is they will have that mentality of sometimes you just gotta. Alphas will find a different way, and omegas will just engineer our own way, which is what I'm doing right now with my efforts on homelessness and ending it, and ending food deserts. And yes, I am legitimately working on that right now. We're about to engage in proof of concept. We just had to figure out how to make the greenhouses not so expensive. But when it comes to, let's say, we form cliques, right? Betas form cliques, and in those cliques, they become micro-indoctrinated because they adopt different mannerisms. For example, I had to fit in when I was doing consulting, marketing consulting, and brand image development back in Arizona. I had to fit in with some pretty not so good people. I mean, straight up misogyny was a regular rule over there. And you'll find that with wealthier people, especially in Arizona, in corporate work, in the corporate world, or that own their own businesses, especially in Arizona. I lived there for 7 years. I can say this confidently. I've known actual billionaires. So, yeah, especially. So, but that's also because it's a passed on culture. You groom the next generation and grooms the next generation and so on and so forth, and you just pass on misogyny over and over again until somebody learns better. Same thing with racism. And I mean, let's talk about the Confederate flag for a second. What a bunch of betas trying to feel like an alpha. Good lord. Celebrating mediocrity left and right. Since when was second place something Americans celebrated? Because last I checked, the Confederates lost. And they keep losing. Look at the Capitol riot, January 6th. We will not forget that. And shame on anybody that wants to hide it. Being a beta is natural the same way being an omega is natural. And I assure you, omegas go through more crap than anybody else. I assure you, I have never met the exception. True story. But that's also because we're different and we're weird. And both, like alphas, they accept us. Betas like, dude, we got something else to look down on. And that is the prerogative. Like when betas are happy, content, and feel secure. You follow me? Security, which means you have the ability to protect progeny, protect yourself, protect a spouse, and produce progeny, or just protect yourself. I mean, I'm not saying anything negative against the LGBTQ community. Why? Because I have friends in that community too. I have friends from pretty much every walk of life that you can imagine. And some of them have good hearts, some of them don't. I mean, there are plenty of betas out there that are just the nicest, sweetest people in the entire world. And some are viciously successful without walking on other people. I'm not saying all betas are bad, the stereotype is. And we need to get over stereotypes. Like how black people commit more crimes. They don't. They just get arrested more often, and we're seeing why. George Floyd. Sam Cooke wasn't famous when he passed away. He became famous afterwards. He was struggling, getting himself up. George Floyd wasn't famous until he was murdered. And that's one of those things, I can't believe he was murdered in plain sight like that. And I can't believe those other cops did nothing. I really don't. Something I really don't tell folks, just because I don't go around the courthouse anymore, is I would go to the Salem courthouse and I would regularly buy coffee for police officers because I very much value their service. I don't always... I've also encountered very lazy police. Police. Um, but then again, we're not gonna go into that. We're not gonna go into that. That detracts from the subject of alphas and betas and omegas. But the end all be all of the alpha beta complex is betas are always seeking advantage or to feel secure. Now, some they get extra greedy about it. But when you have too many people and there's not as much opportunity to grow or to become a pseudo alpha, a perceptive alpha, which, by the way, fake it till you make it, that does work. How do you think the first alpha was made? We were all balanced at first, and then we started segregating. Deal with it. And betas are stronger together. That's why they form cliques, and that's why they adopt, and they form micro-indoctrination or just indoctrination, period. And that's why in any indoctrination, they feel proud of it. People that celebrate mediocrity and fly the Confederate flag, they're proud of it. Good God. And then you've got other people that are proud of legitimate things. Things that don't say, I took second place, and so did my ancestors. Oh, Lord have mercy. I'm sorry, the Confederate flag is... It's not just offensive, it's embarrassing. It really is. Like, it is just straight up embarrassing. But, you know, people will defend it, and will defend their stance, and will find other arguments to make their stance stronger in their eyes. Because they want to feel superior. That's why so many people want to feel superior. The people that don't are omegas and alphas. And that's because that's not our agenda. With omegas, we want to fix things. We want to figure things out. We want to learn. Again, I haven't met the exception yet, but I'm sure they're out there. And then alphas, they've got high level. I mean, if you've ever met an alpha, a true alpha, you'll understand. In fact, I'll throw something else out there just because, I'm going to throw two alphas out there that some of you won't want to admit are alphas. Like, clearly, Putin, beta. Beta all the way. He is a pseudo-alpha. He was trained, kind of like the military, to become a pseudo-alpha. But alphas, they see competition as competition. Betas see competition as a threat. That's why you'll have, like, Netanyahu, okay? Clear beta. Okay. Narcissism is huge for betas because they want to look better societally. It's huge. And keep in mind, betas took over the world. I have to keep throwing this out there because some betas that are, you know, a little bit weaker are going to be jumping off this radio show. And, you know, I want to give everybody a chance to understand and accept themselves. Because being a beta means you guys won. You guys pretty much own the world at the moment. But when you have nowhere to climb, you climb over each other. You want to grasp for any advantage you can. And that's natural. There's nothing against it. Why do you think humankind became the dominant species on the planet? Alphas didn't want to do that. Omegas sure as heck didn't want to do that. But leave it to betas to innovate and engineer and figure things out. I mean, honestly, it's outstanding, and I don't know why we have such a negative connotation. We just need to train out the negative parts, right? So we start training that whole, you know, treat each other good and all of that good stuff. And don't steal, don't kill, all the good. How to say this? There are some betas that are very, very detrimental. And they're the ones that set the stereotype. Just like there's been a few black folks never anywhere even remotely close to what the media would portray or whatnot. Same thing with Mexicans, Latinos. The portrayals in the media reinforce the stereotype. But not all stereotypes are true, and not all stereotypes should be bad. Now when it comes to the beta complex, like the beta side of the complex, it's very dominant, but when you have no one else, when you can band together and you've got this system of indoctrination, maybe you're into the Confederate flag, or maybe you're an actual doctor or whatnot, you place value on what you believe in as per indoctrination, excuse me. You place value in it. That is a part of you. That's a part of who you are. And you know what? It's called ownership. And I completely support that. I believe in that myself as an omega. But let's say you're still stuck in that disadvantaged situation. You're still looking for people to look down on. That's why you'll see a lot more people from impoverished situations or financially struggling, or that came from a background of financial struggle, that are racist. And there's no other reason than to look down on somebody else. There's no biological or any... I've lived in these neighborhoods. The stereotypes are wrong. Like, predominantly wrong. Now, there are some that are absolutely true, and don't get me wrong. Well, I'm not even going to go into that. There are some that are pretty accurate, but most are false or dramatized. And then it's easier to look down on somebody when you have nowhere else to go, and when you aren't able to achieve the dreams that you want, because, I mean, let's just be real. You got to put work in. Not everybody wants to. And sometimes you just have a hard life situation where you just can't overcome some barriers. What do you do then? Well, you got two choices. You can grow as a person, or you can look down on other people and put them down in order to elevate yourself in your mind. Because that's all that's really happening. When you bully somebody, when you put somebody down, when you're racist, when you're discriminatory, it's nothing more than being inside one's own head and feeling better about oneself by proxy when there's 7 billion people on this planet. Kind of illogical, right? But when you go back in time, it really makes sense why that worked, why that's built into us, why we have this complex, and why things have changed the way that they've changed. Now keep in mind too, I am a religious man. Well, let's just say I have a background, right? And I have beliefs. And my beliefs are founded in science, but it's science that isn't widely accepted, or at least not yet, right? And I know that sounds really weird. I just don't want to start throwing it out there because I'm not holding anybody's belief against them, and I'm not trying to alienate anybody's belief. Different skin tones are proof that we adapt to our environment. That's called evolving. When our bodies adapt to sun exposure, to cold exposure and whatnot, that is evolving. Different behaviors that we learn and that pass down hereditary, they're evolved learned behaviors. Fear of spiders, fear of snakes, that's evolved. Okay? Adaptation is one of the reasons why we are the dominant species on the planet. Our brains adapted, whereas other species did not. And then we developed digits and all that, hands, and we just became extremely versatile creatures. And then we started creating. And it's like, whoa, dude, really? Yay! Look at this painting. Like seriously, what other creature on Earth would find it logical to paint something and then look at it? There's no utilitarian value whatsoever, but we still enjoy it. We enjoy music. That was the last episode. The alpha-beta complex is real, and when betas don't have anywhere to go, they will engineer scenarios through bullying. They will engineer projected Schadenfreude. And that's to satisfy their ego, which is an on and off switch. And it's up to our frontal cortex to interpret the prefrontal cortex's interpretation and sorting mechanism of our memory centers of our brain. So ultimately, it's up to us on whether we choose to be a good person. That's basically what I was just saying right there. But that choice is a constant one. And I don't think that it should take death for us to choose to be better people to each other, while still claiming, oh my lord. Yeah, speaking of, while still claiming different religions, but being discriminatory. And then seeking out those tiny little tidbits that might maybe validate your stance. I mean, I find it abhorrent. I have known people of every background that you can imagine. And there have been good people and bad people along the way. But I've seen racism in action. I've seen the hatred behind people's eyes. When people are depressed, so let's say you're on the other side of the thing. I just called all of you betas. Now, we've got a couple different options in this one. You can maintain the stereotype that betas are inferior and taciturn and just not that smart. Or you can realize that betas took over the world and invented some of the best systems the world has ever seen that dramatically drive innovation. Right now we're stagnant as a country, and that's because we've been led by selfish betas. And that's why pretty much every religion says not to be selfish. Look out for yourself. Absolutely. The Abrahamic blessing? Oh, yeah. I mean, seriously, if... Put it this way. It's okay to accumulate wealth. I know people that have done it in a very clean way, and they're just nice people. Like, insanely nice people. I want to know them. And not because of their money. But that's the choice we have to make as individuals. Do we want to act illogically and fall into the beliefs of our ancestors, or do we want to learn from them? As I've mentioned before, it is the prerogative of the parent to create a scenario where the child can be better, and it's the prerogative of the child to be better than the parent. Both parties got to work together, but they don't always. Some parents are crap. Some children, well, once in a while, you know what I mean? Like, Jeff, roll the dice. But what makes it a roll of the dice, 99 times out of 100, is what we choose. We have the ability to choose to be a good person or a bad person. The alpha-beta complex does not determine who we ultimately become. And I assure you, when it comes to Vladimir Putin, that is a beta that I'm running from. And while I'm running, I'm looking out for all of his comrades that he's going to be throwing at me. Netanyahu. Okay, he is very clearly a beta. Okay, well, let me jump on this, because Netanyahu is just a serious beta. So, betas always want to maintain control and power, because when they maintain control and power, they have comfort and they have security. Okay? And when you have to take off your shirt and get on a horse, just like the Old Spice guy, and do that to look strong, or you have to do basic judo moves and whatnot. That's Putin, by the way. That guy is so fronting. And then he sees the other competition as competition. That's why you got a trail of bodies behind Putin. As far as the whole Israel and Netanyahu thing, yeah, he's going after Palestine right now and has been for a long time, so that he can be a bully to a technologically and militarily inferior country. It's not anti-Semitic to be critical of a governance. Okay? Israel, oh yeah, they're awesome as people. I know plenty of Israelis, not plenty, but I know a few Israelis that I really do like those folks. And they're genuine people, but then you've also got Pakistanis. And they're genuine people too. Okay? The actions of leaders shouldn't determine the character of their people. They shouldn't. And we just had somebody get out of office after 500,000. That number was way too high, and we had the playbook. But then again, that was selfishness, and we see all of that. Like, narcissism is part of when you get into a higher status and you need to diminish somebody else to maintain status as the as both the victim and the hero, which, believe it or not, it happens a lot. Netanyahu is a perfect example of that. But he's very much a beta. Putin, he's very much a beta. Now, Putin's a trained beta, and he's scary as all get out. Like, if Putin were angry at me, I would run. Make no mistake about that. He is a chess master, and he was ex-KGB. For good reason. I know his history. Or at least as much as is disclosed. Netanyahu, beta. And right now he's just grasping at straws to maintain power. But, I mean, you don't take handouts from the U.S. and then turn around and speak in your own language to your own people and say, I can control the U.S. Again, beta move. And that's to look superior to his people. An alpha and an omega, neither one of us would need to look superior. It's natural. So I just overviewed the alpha-beta complex. Please choose to be good people out there. Please get vaccinated. It's free. You've got Uber and Lyft rides up until the 1st. Please get vaccinated. And if it's too late for that, still get vaccinated. You're protecting other people, and it's important. In the meantime, I hope I offended a few people, because we need to be better as a society. We need to be better to our neighbors. Be better to fellow Americans. The color of your skin just was determined by where your ancestors lived at one point. It doesn't determine who we are. So you guys stay safe out there. Feel free to follow me, EADORNUS, on Twitter. And on YouTube, you can find Autistic Commando. Stay safe, y'all.